Hello, my name is Catherine, and I am one of the 3 full-time professional tutors here at RMCAD at the SLC. I specialize in anything related to your interior design classes, anything from drafting to learning Revit, all the way to making that final senior portfolio. In this video, we will be going over line weights and drafting hierarchy. So we will be starting in hand drafting, and then we will go into AutoCAD and discuss layers a little bit, and then finish off with taking all of that information and those standards and using it in Revit. So let's get started with the video. When starting out drafting, your pencils are incredibly important. There are several different types of pencils that you can use, whether you buy cheap mechanical pencils or expensive mechanical pencils. I'm not here to tell you that one is best. You will find what is best for the way that you work. What is most important about the pencil is that you are using the different gauges, which is the 0.3, 0.5, 0.7, and 0.9, and that you know what those lead types are as well. Some are softer, some are harder. They're going to be sharp, clean lines. So for instance, a 0.3, you want a sharper pencil because you're going to be creating very small, detailed lines. Those are the interior of a window, so the window pane, the actual glass. Those are a 0.3, whereas you will use a soft 0.9 to create the poche for the wall, so that interior darkness that you create in the exterior walls. Other components have somewhere in between those two, typically. So your lighting, your furniture, your built-ins, those are all going to, be dependent on what type of drawing you're doing. So whether that's a floor plan view, an elevation, etc. If you are doing an RCP, a reflected ceiling plan, but showing furniture, you want that furniture to be ever so lightly drawn on your RCP, maybe an 05 with a fairly hard pencil graphite, because that is not the prominent part of what we want to see in an RCP. However, showing furniture is handy in an RCP because we want to know what that lighting is reacting to. Why is that chandelier in that place? It's because it's hanging over a dining room table. And so while we want to show furniture, it does not need to be prominent in a reflected ceiling plan. With built-ins and appliances, they're going to be a little darker. They are going to be in all of your floor plans, regardless of what type it is, because they are built in. They do not just move around like furniture, like a dining room table or a sofa might. Room tags, symbols, and dimensions are going to be typically your darkest, and that does not mean use a 0.9, but usually a 0.7. We want it to be dark, we want it to be clear, and we want it to be prominent. And as you can see here in this example drawing, because it is printed out, it loses a lot of the nuances between all those different pencil line weights. If you're copying, especially as a student, we're turning them in virtually to our instructors. And in 03, that fine window glass might not show up once you have taken a picture of it and put it in a PDF. And so we want to then make sure that after we've done that we're looking at it again and making sure that those line types are still showing up the way that they're supposed to. So in this example, and disregard that the dimensions are in red, but in this example, our door swings look exactly the same line weight as the doors themselves. And that is not accurate. We want to make sure that that swing is the lightest line weight in this drawing. We might have other things that will go in that space, symbols, etc. And so because you have to overlap that information, we need it to be the lightest or the darkest dependent on what is most important for that drawing and to communicate the correct information. So your pencil types, again, are very important, as is the scale and reading your scale correctly. This is one of probably the hardest things you're going to do and the most important. I'm reading this scale for the first time You're going to make lots of mistakes, and it goes back to that old saying that you want to measure twice, cut once. And so you want to always be double checking yourself. Oftentimes what I do with my scale is I will put a clip on the top of it, or I will even tape the other parts of the scale that I'm not using for a certain drawing. So if I am drawing in a 1/4 inch scale, then I tape everything off so that I don't make the mistake of reading a different side of the scale. There are several increments of measurement on this scale. We have 1/2 inch, 1/4 inch, 1/8 of an inch, 1 inch, and several others, including just the standard imperial ruler on here as well. There are 2 measurements on each side. So you're either reading from left to right for a 1/2 inch scale, like in this example, or you're reading right to left. The other thing is that those little tick marks before the 0 are your inches to get 1 foot and 3 inches or whatever. There's actually a great worksheet in your drafting class that I suggest using and practicing on before you start drawing your first project so that you can get really, really accustomed to that scale. Referring to those handouts that are given in the class, that when you go to print them out, they are not going to be to scale. So while the instructor may be telling you that you are drawing in an 1/8 of an inch scale or a 1/2 inch scale, hard as you might try, those printouts are not ever going to be accurate. And the best way to try and fix that is trial and error, of course, and then using your scale when you do print something out for the first time. Always check your exterior doors first. Exterior doors are almost always going to be 3 feet. Double doors are 6 feet. Try it in an 1/8 of an inch, try it in a 1/4 inch, 3/8 of an inch scale, and your door is 3 feet, then that's the scale you're going to continue to use so that everything else measures up accordingly. All right, so as you can see, I am in AutoCAD and I have created just a simple 4 walls, a door, and a window. I've created layers for the different types of lines that I have currently. So as you can see, I have walls, and they are set to this gray color, and they are a 1. The only one that would be larger or the same is your dimensions, annotations, etc. I then have the swing or glass, which I have created as yellow and is a 0.25. It is the smallest currently. And then I have doors and window jambs, which is brown and 50. So now I'm going to go to my layout or my sheet, and I want to create the scale that this needs to be in. And so I'm going to double click within that frame, center it on there, and then I'm going to click outside of the sheet. So now I can no longer click on the building. So then if I go up to print or plot, I'm going to save this. I go and open that PDF. So now I have this black and white version of this very simple drawing that I've created. We have the door and we have the window. So I just want to point out that you can barely see the window and door lines. They are showing up as just the ever so lightest of gray. And then we've got the darker door and jamb, and then we've got our gray walls. What I want is the door jambs and the walls to actually be flipped as far as color. So I am going to go back to my AutoCAD and I am going to change the door and jambs to the gray, and I'm going to change my walls to the brown. So now I'm going to go back. So we're going to apply and okay this so that we can see the differences. All right. And so now we can see it's in black and white. The darkest is our walls. The next darkest is our door jambs and the door itself. And then the lightest is the swing, okay, as we can see there. So in AutoCAD, color and line weight really do matter. If I wanted that swing to be a little bit darker, and I can simply just change that swing to just a little bit darker of a color. Let's try this light orange. And so then when I go to print again, it'll be just a little bit darker. Another thing that I am noticing in this drawing is that my door jambs go past the wall line. As you can see here, they go into the line. I can also see that I've got a little line here that I accidentally did not erase while I was drawing, and it's black. And so I want to go back and fix those little details. So then I'm going to go into AutoCAD. I'm going to look for that little line, which is that, I believe, and I'm going to just erase it. And then I am not sure that I can make these lines visibly. We do not see them bleeding into one another. We don't see the thickness of this line. All the lines are the same thickness when we are in this model mode. So I can try and do that, but that will cause other problems. So what I want to do is always make connections, and we'll talk about poching the walls here in a second, and that's exactly why. It's because then that hatched region needs to be in an enclosed area. What we could do is then just bring our line weight for the walls maybe down a little bit. And so I might make them 50, and then I might make the doors 35. And then that should help those lines to not bleed into each other and look like they're overlapping. So this is test 3. I'm saving again, which is not uncommon when you're working in AutoCAD. You will have to, trial and error quite a bit. So I'm not going to change this to black and white. However, I do want to zoom in and see that these lines do still overlap a little bit. When you're using line weights that maybe aren't as drastic as these ones are, so you're using a grayscale that is maybe a little bit closer to one another, then that's not going to be as prominent. So I do want to cover hatching really quick. I'm going to go up to hatch, and as you can see, I am on layer swing glass, and so I want to make sure that my walls is checkmarked. And so that's the color that is going to be pochade. If you do not want a solid, you can change to maybe just a crosshatch, and it still looks pretty dense. Okay, so what we want to do is then change this size. It's at 1 inch right now. I'm going to try 1 foot and see what that looks like. But as you can see now, we've got a diagonal pattern here, and far away it looks quite dense. And then for the other part of the wall, I'm going to try a C and do just this portion of the wall so that we can see the difference when we go to print. And so as you can see, we've got a very dense poche, or we've got a very open poche. And depending on your needs and what your just aesthetic choices are, you can do all sorts of different poches for your wall. You'll also choose a different poche for casework. So something more open like this would be for casework. Talking more about components, furniture versus built-in, like casework, those would also be different line weights. They wouldn't be drastically different, but you would want to show a difference. And so you would create your new layer, name it, and then choose your color and choose your line weight. As you can see, it goes all the way from, 0.05 obviously would be our lowest, and then all the way to 2.11, which is absurdly large. You wouldn't ever use that. I'm thinking a 0.50 is probably as high as you might want to go. You could, however, poche using a larger line weight. That would change the denseness of both of these, regardless of the scale of them. So there's just a brief overview of how to deal with line weights in AutoCAD. I also want to go over different types of lines. We have a continuous solid line, and right now that's our only option here, but we can go to load, and then we have various dotted or dashed lines and different patterns as well, depending on your needs. Dashed lines often you want to use for upper cabinets. We want to show as built in, however, might be higher than that viewpoint line in a floor plan. Remember that a floor plan shows everything below 4 feet. And so if something is higher than that, i.e. the upper cabinets, we would show that as a dotted line to show that they still exist there. We just can't necessarily see them in a floor plan view. So that is just a brief overview of line weights in AutoCAD. The concepts stay the same whether we are hand drafting or moving into AutoCAD. Those walls, doors, etc., all have a different line weight and line type, and that shows through when you print. Lastly, we're going to move on to Revit. I am making this an exterior brick on CMU for this example. This wall has several layers in it. We have a floor plan view where we can see all these layers with these different patterns in it, or we can go to a section view and we're seeing it at the length of it, and we can still see a lot of those layers. But we know for a fact that it has all those different layers in it and patterns. So we want to be able to see those. So the best way to do that is by changing it to a 1/4 inch scale and then fine detail. And so now we can see all of those layers. Now, when we go to print, we may want to change this scale. Then we will have to maybe rethink what we want to see and what we don't need to see. Oftentimes, as we've talked about in hand drafting and in AutoCAD, an instructor may just want you to poche this wall. And so then we don't need those layers at all. We would just go and fill this wall. So we would go to edit type and you can change them to whatever you want. So if you didn't want that poche to be so dense, you could change it to something else, or you can go in to the color and make it just a gray. You can also see that it changed our detail level because that option that we changed here is called the coarse scale. Just know that if you don't want to use that, you need to change the detail level, and so then you can see the patterns again. However, it is nice to have both options and to go back and forth very easily without having to undo anything. There's also a couple of other reasons why patterns and line weights might look a little different. Phasing. So if you go to the Manage tab and go to Phasing, we can see here in the graphic override that we have all these options for existing and new. Do you see how different these two are? Existing, if we go to click into that one, it is a fairly dark grayscale and a 2. However, the existing is black and a 4. And so if you're using phasing, I recommend changing those to be the same so that when you get to your final construction document, you're going to have existing walls and new construction walls look the same. You also don't want these patterns necessarily. The reason why this one is filled right now is because we have that coarse poche. Also with demolished, you typically want really light dotted lines, so I might change these to a 1. All of these things matter, and that these line weights and patterns can be changed in a multitude of different ways for different reasons. You can also create your own filters in other ways. I'm not going to go over that in this video. However, do know that creating and adding filters to a project be specifically used if you're doing an electrical plan or something like that, and you want to identify those things really specifically by color, pattern, and line weight. You can do that as well. Other way that we can change line weights, patterns, and color is through the visibility graphic. This is per view, okay? So you can make just your floor patterns, and so then those line weights that you assign for floors is not going to change the wall floor lines that you've created. Same with column. We may want walls to look less distinct, and we want those columns to really show through, maybe in a detailed drawing. We can really have a lot of control over all of these specific components and how dark or how light we see them, what patterns they have, and also dashed lines, etc. We can also halftone, like I've talked about before. Furniture in an RCP, we might want the furniture to show, but we do not want it to overtake the RCP. We want the lighting components to show the darkest because that's what we're talking about in an RCP, but we want furniture to show, so then we could halftone furniture here in just the visibility graphics. So let's go and make a detail drawing. If we go to View, Wall Detail, let's just start at 1/2 inch. We oftentimes put several detail drawings on one sheet, and sometimes it's a tiny little thing like a column, or sometimes it's a really big thing like a desk. And so those scales are going to differ dependent on how big they need to be to show the level of detail we want, right? And so that's the only time a scale is going to be different on a sheet. Okay, we have created a drafting view to create this detailed drawing because I want to draw all these lines and components separately. I'm going to go to annotate and I'm just going to use the detail line to start drawing. We're going to do a 1 foot exterior wall. We would of course put break lines on the ends of these, show that this is not the whole length of a wall, this is just a little part of a wall. And then I can keep using detail lines to kind of decide how many layers I want, and I can move all of these later and get really specific and dimension each of them. But for right now, I am just laying them down. So if we go back 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 layers. This side is our interior side where this would be gypsum board, much like this section right here. This side though is brick, and so it's going to be a little thicker. And so while this doesn't have to do specifically with line weights, it does have to do with making your drawing very, very clean and easy to read. These dimensions are important in a detail, and so they don't do us any good at all if they're all on top of each other and we can't read them. This whole conversation about line weights is because we're talking about not only cleanliness, but then also the importance of these. A contractor needs to be able to read it to do their jobs. And so just like in hand drafting, the same concept over into CAD and over into Revit. We just do it a little differently. The concept stays the same. How we achieve them are a little bit different. So then we can start putting patterns inside of each of these sections. And we go to region. We are going to use the rectangle tool because all we have to do is go from one corner to the bottom opposite corner. It's a crosshatch and we want just a diagonal. The other thing that we need to do in Revit is we need to duplicate this and we're going to rename it. So we're naming this brick. That way, when we go in to do another region, we're going to go ahead and do this one next because I know that it's that default diagonal crosshatch. So we're going to check mark it. And so we know that this is the correct diagonal crosshatch. However, the scale is a little off. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and I'm going to duplicate it and rename it, but we know we need to change the scale. It needs to be a lot larger. So we're going to go into the dot, 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 into the layer, and we're going to click on this pencil, and we are going to change this to, let's just try 1 inch. This is enough for this example. What I want to show is that far away, this one looks a little bit lighter than the rest, and so we can change that line weight. So that line weight is only a 1. I'm going to bump it up to a 3. It's quite darker. And so you can decide individually what all of those line weights are. Also, remember that your region is independent from your lines that we created originally for the wall itself. And so you can make the line thicker, but keep the pattern the same line weight. So if we wanted to change, let's make these wide lines. And now let's go ahead and just throw this onto a sheet. Drafting views. We're going to pull this over and place it. So now we have this really nice drawing. The wall itself, like the edges of the walls, don't look any thicker than the rest of the drawing, and I would like it to. So in the properties, we're going to go to visibility graphics, and we want just the lines, and we're going to change this 5, and we're going to see what that does. It still doesn't look much thicker, does it? So then the last thing I'm going to try is go into visibility graphics override, and I am going to make the detail items, which I now know are the patterns themselves, and I'm going to make those halftone. So now those are a halftone, which makes the outer lines look darker, which is what I want. The other thing that we can do is now that we've got the regions, we don't need these lines that are marking off all of these individual sections. I'm going to keep that last one just because I want that to show dark. That looks a lot better. We've got nice dark lines on the edge of the wall, but the patterns themselves are a little bit lighter. All right, so thank you for watching the video. I hope that it was helpful and that you can continue on with your assignment with success. If not, feel free to reach out to myself or anyone here in the Learning Commons. Good luck.